A couple months ago, I was watching some Australian fights on UFC Fight Pass under the organization Eternal MMA. One of the fighters displayed some body language that I was super interested in. A little bit about my background, something I've really been into since I was a young kid. My father would always talk about watching people's body language, nonverbal communication. And as I got older, the more I researched and learned about how presenting yourself in specific ways could suit your potential outcomes regarding job applications, going on first dates, how we carry ourselves during first impressions. Things such as this always have interested me. I'm watching the fight, and there's this MMA fighter who is cool, calm, and collective the entire fight. As the fight is progressing, he's slowly executing his game plan to perfection, which allowed him to have the ultimate outcome of a victory, a stoppage victory. It wasn't in the victory on why I was interested. It was the moments directly after. The fighter he was fighting submits. The ref pulls the fighter who won the fight away from the fighter who lost the fight. And for about 3 seconds, you see the victorious fighter barking at the guy who lost. And when you watch the whole fight, it was totally out of character by the winner. I was totally shocked on that multiple second outburst, but then just as quickly as he outburst, he stopped and caught himself, and he was able to pull himself back in. And I thought about that, and I listening to the announcers, and they said this is something Justin always does. It's one of the reasons why his fans adore him. He has this sort of ability to be cool, calm, and collective in the chaos, and then in moments have this outburst of emotion, adrenaline, of authentic humanity in that moment. And then he's always able to pull it back in. And that's what I was interested in this fighter and talking with him. So for episode 251, we recorded this about a week ago. My special guest is Australia MMA fighter, South African born, Justin Van Heerden. His fans call him by the name Lockjaw. He trains at one of the top gyms in Australia, boasting one of the probably best training partners one could have, UFC champion Alex Volkanovski. We talk about what that's like. We talk about the entrepreneurial side, business. Justin has multiple layers to what he's doing. He's not just a fighter, and he's also getting ready for a huge spot coming up, a co-main event spot down here in Australia. Hopefully you like this. This is episode 251. Without further ado, I bring to you my guest, Justin Van Heerden.
You said you do stuff, you ask things that aren't Googleable.
And that's why this podcast has become popular and successful. It's you're enjoying it, and you're also benefiting from the knowledge that people are dropping.
Enjoying the fights. I was a bit bummed about the Glover sort of Yuri outcome, but
dude, man,
yeah.
Glover is going to be, and I mean this in the best way, man, he's going to look back and there's certain moments that are going to haunt him. Like, obviously it was the 5th round, but 28, just the fact that there was only 30 seconds left, that alone, technique aside of saying what should have happened, that alone, man, it's going to eat at him, man. That's the kind of like the dichotomy though of the sport that you guys choose to do.
Exactly. And I feel like that is going to be, I don't know, that's more of a reason for him to just have like at least one more fight, because you can't let your career finish like on something like that.
Man, I took Glover to win by TKO or KO, and I'm screaming at the screen because it seemed Cormier kept saying why he was doing it, but I think in the 3rd or 4th and moments in the 5th, Glover had Yuri hurt, and he just, rather than stand on the feet, he'd instinctively go for the takedown. I mean, you're a grappler. You can attest to that. Is that something that is just because of drills and repetition in the cognition of the decision-making is removed? Or is that more, what's happening there on that end of why he just wouldn't stay there when the fighter looked like he was hurt?
I feel like for someone like Glover, it's a bit weird because obviously he's super experienced, and he's probably outside of Damian Maia, he probably has the best jiu-jitsu for MMA that we've ever seen. Well, Charles Oliveira's up there too, but I think like pure specialist wise, I feel like Glover's sort of up there. So, to see him sort of like have him hurt and then just revert back to that, I think in his head, that's always what he has. What he has in the back of his head is like, okay, if I have them hurt or I see an opportunity, I'm just going to go for the submission because like it just adds to, I guess it adds to the legacy in a sense. And he's one of those people that didn't really, it's not like he went and changed his whole approach after he lost to John Jones and went on a bit of a losing streak. Yeah. He kind of just stuck to what got him to the dance initially, which was his like superior jiu-jitsu, his ability to wear on people, and then eventually, just submit them. So I feel like, in that sense, when he saw that he had Yuri hurt, he went back to that automatically because Yuri is such a threat. Like Yuri's been cracked a few times in fights and then been able to sort of just wade into the fire inside the pocket and then counter in a physical way.
The Volkanovski fight, the Dom Reyes fight, Yuri almost as like a testament of how he feels what personal development is. He puts himself in those positions almost to see, I don't want to say because your health is on the line, but it's almost like he wants to see how he reacts because the chin is up. And I think one of the guys today, the analyst, said that traditional martial arts style, the hands are down, not a boxing guard. But yeah, he a couple times, it's almost like a drunken master style. A couple times he looks like he's out on his feet or he's wobbly, and maybe that's part of his thing. But man, that was a war.
That's probably, I'd say that's a close second for best light heavyweight title fight we've ever seen.
Gustafsson Jones won?
Yeah, 100%.
How'd you score that one?
I still think Gustafsson won that fight.
Man, I've watched it for the second time recently with the pen and paper scoring it, and it's tough. That spinning technique at the very end. He was starting to kind of like wilt a bit, Gustafsson, after he got hit with that big shot. I think it was the end of the fourth, but that was a close call. And it's that division too, man. When you look at the cardio of Glover, how old he is, how big he is, his style, and still be able to carry that with him and have Yuri, a young 29-year-old, in danger, man. It was a testament to his work ethic. I thought of you. I was watching the undercard. It was the Kulabov fight. And I thought of something I wanted to talk to you about in relationship to kind of the psychology of how you view your career in the sport. I'm watching the Kulabov fight, and he was walked out by your last opponent, Alan Philpott, a kid who came over from England, has had pretty long MMA career. I mean, Philpott has a victory over the kid who fights in the UFC. His name is, he's had his last 3 fights canceled. Not Jack Shore. Another, he's tested, and he's in the corner of Kulabov. When you're watching that, you just beat Philpott. You got a co-main coming up in July. Talk about that feeling? Does it inspire you? What's it like? Because you guys, Australian MMA, people don't understand. I mean, it seems like you get an eternal belt. You're on the door of the UFC.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not under any illusion as to sort of what's ahead and what is at stake with my fight in July because Muhammad's undefeated. He's 7-0.
A little bit older.
Outside of him, there's I've pretty much fought all the other top featherweights in the country. And I've spoken about it a little bit. Like, I think people sort of look at my record and then they go, "Oh, okay," and they sort of it's understandable. You got to take it for what it is. But at the same time, if you look at my record as a featherweight, I'm 8-3, and in my last 5, I'm 4-1 with 3 finishes. So
that's the important bit.
And I've beaten the 2 most experienced featherweights in the region. So it kind of, I know I'm like in a really good spot. And obviously Eternal's such a big promotion now. It's easily the biggest promotion in the region, and the eyeballs are on there. You're seeing that people are sort of paying attention to what's happening on the promotion. And if you go out there and put on these performances and stay consistent, it kind of just reflects back to that. So like, I know in July, if I go out there in July, do my thing, get another win, another finish, hopefully, it separates me away from everyone, puts me as the number 1 featherweight in the region by a mile. And then, my next fight's going to be for the title. And then if I win that, it's not out of the realm of possibility to assume that, we're going to start potentially seeing the next step come my way whether that's in the UFC, whether that's PFL, Bellator, One Championship, whatever it may be. Obviously, ideally, my first choice would be the UFC. I mean, I'd love to slot into the featherweight division in the UFC and start working my way towards that world title that my teammate currently holds, and then just go from there. So I think that's something too. Like you gotta focus on what's right in front of you, but at the same time, just have a clear path and direction that you want to go to and that you want to reach. And like I have the benefit of actually, every day I get to spend time on the match training with the man who's the world champion in my weight class. So like I have that insider's look on what's at stake, what you need to do, the work that has to go in, the how you have to approach it outside of the gym, the mentality you have to have, So I feel like that's sort of just going to benefit me because I feel like obviously you can look at like Volko as an athlete, even if, there's just an independent sort of look at him as an athlete and go, oh, okay, you can understand that there's something special at work here and that. But at the end of the day, it just comes back to the work that he does on the daily. And I get to see that and be part of that and try and emulate that. So I'm very confident that moving forward, I'm going to continue to show that and then get to where I need to get to. I mean, I feel like a lot of people put so much pressure on wanting to make it to the big dance, whether it's in the UFC or whatever, that's all they put their energy into, and then it happens, and then it's almost like they're pretty content, and then they go, okay, and then they're not ready for the hard work to actually start. Whereas from the second I won this belt right here, I've just thought about turning it into a world title. That's it. That's all I've been thinking about.
That's the Coast MMA 145 belt?
Yeah.
Yep. And then
As soon as I won that,
yep,
in my head, I just went, like, the minute I won that, like the very second, I just remember thinking to myself, all right, the next one's a world title. That's the goal. That's what we're focusing on. Yeah,
it's nothing but amazing experience, that in itself, of being at a gym with Volkanovski, him cornering you your last fight as well. I mean, that's, everybody notices that sort of stuff. What I really noticed, I was watching the card from an entrepreneurial side. One of the things I do with a business partner of mine, we're incorporating rock and roll music with fighting. I've been, like, boxed as a kid, watching MMA since the first event. I just turned 40. So I'm more of an MMA nerd. I'll watch any show. I'll go to a live amateur show if there was one thing in Sydney. But when I'm watching your fight, I knew that you were fighting. I knew that Alex was cornering you. I knew Philpott. I knew his resume, but I didn't know what I love the most about you, man. So my undergrad is in psychology, and you had this thing. I had never seen a fighter after you'd won and the bell rings, you guys are on the ground still. Your inner, like, warrior, the thing that you probably have to harness on a daily basis, it's why you train, why you're disciplined, had come out. And then the announcers were talking about, one of the announcers made a comment about, this is what Justin does. And then you caught yourself right away. And you're like, oh shit, I can't really rub it in that much. But the sort of honesty and the vulnerability of your emotions, and then being able to channel them back in, I noticed that. And I was like, man, I want to talk to that guy. Talk about, then the question would be how you harness that. That's obviously your spirit within you, something you were probably born with. Maybe talk about what that is and how it's fueled you in your fighting career.
Yeah, I mean, for me, obviously, I'm always going to try and, have like an honest approach to everything. And I'm going to always put everything out there, whether it's when I'm inside the cage, whether it's when I'm doing, talking or doing any sort of thing like that. I'd rather just say how I feel and like let what's happening in the moment happen. And then, like you sort of said, catch myself and go, okay, maybe I don't need to, go to this sort of point or approach something like this. I'd much rather do that, but still than just, I guess, put things aside completely or not have that authentic sort of reaction to things, if you know what I mean. Sure. I mean, Alan talked a lot of shit in the lead up to this fight.
Okay, that was my next question. Was it personal?
Yeah, he pushed, he was trying to push a lot of buttons and stuff like that. Like, he didn't take it too far and make it too personal like some other people have, but he just, and so, like, as soon as he tapped, that's what happened there. That's the emotion coming out, and like where I screamed at him and I said to him, I was like, you wanted this, now you have to deal with it. Like, this is the outcome. And then obviously, but after that, you let it out. And then obviously, yeah, in the moment, once I jumped on the cage and I kind of like, I think you can sort of see it when I jumped on the cage, I sort of looked at the people that were there supporting and like some friends and family and stuff like that. And then I took a deep breath and kind of just like steadied myself down. And I was like, all right,
On to the next one.
It's out, it's done now. Like, let's go and like, let's just proceed forward. And then obviously when I jumped off the cage, I went and spoke to Alan and his team, and everything was. And even after the fight, I had a nice long conversation with his head coach. Obviously, Josh Coolabau and I are quite good friends. He's he comes down and does a lot of work at freestyle.
Great, man. He looked great tonight. People sleep on that kid. Hopefully after tonight, people start to have their eyes open about, man, he's electric.
He's very good. Obviously, I had the privilege of seeing Josh rise up from the regional scene and now obviously watching him fight in the UFC. And yeah, he's definitely something special. And I think people are going to start appreciating that now after a fight like tonight, or today that he had. It's just going to be, a benefit for him. But like that translates back to, like you sort of said, everything how honest you are and, with yourself at all times. I can't be like, I can't put on a front in any way, whether it's while I'm fighting or after I'm fighting, before, it doesn't matter, because that's just not how it's going to be. It's never going to work for me to do that. I feel like I was put on this planet to fight. I feel like I was always going to find my way into some sort of combat sport, if I'm honest. I mean, I started with wrestling when I was a kid, but I mean, like, I always knew I was going to pursue.
Where was that at? I mean, you represent South Africa, and you have an Aussie accent, and the wrestling background. Were you born in South Africa? Did you?
Yeah.
How old were you when you came to Australia?
Yeah, so I was born in South Africa, and then wrestling's kind of a pretty big sport over there. It's not. I mean, it's not like as hectic as it is in America, and as sort of
like it was it was in gym class. It's like a 7. I grew up in Northeast Ohio. I live in Sydney now, but yeah, growing up wrestling in Ohio. I mean, we're like 7 years old, 8 years old. It's part of the curriculum.
Yeah, and in South Africa it is as well in some ways. There's at least that sort of push for the sport still. So I started when I was a kid in South Africa, and then I briefly, when I was, I think I was like 9 or 10, maybe just a bit before that, we moved to America briefly, and I lived in Atlanta.
Okay.
For like a couple of years. So obviously, continued wrestling while I was there. Moved back to South Africa, carried on playing all sorts of sport, wrestling, gymnastics, all sorts of things like that. And then moved here when I was like, I think 14, 15.
Oh, wow.
And then obviously since then I've been here in Australia. And when I first arrived in Australia, obviously I figured out that wrestling wasn't as, big.
You can't find it. Yeah, it's not prominent.
Yeah. So I just pretty much competed in all sorts of sport you could imagine. And then, I think in 2013, like June 2013, I remember just like, I think I watched like a UFC event, and then I started getting more and more into the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like just jumped on Google, and I was like, oh, is there like a jiu-jitsu gym also like something around here? Maybe I can just like give it a try.
Are you in Wollongong? Is that
no, this was at the time I was living in North Queensland, in Mackay, in North Queensland.
Where are you at now?
So now I'm in Wollongong, yeah.
Right near the gym.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So initially that's where I started, and then I walked into the gym. I had a couple sessions, and I was kind of like, obviously the wrestling translated quite well to the jiu-jitsu side of things, and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then I started getting sort of more into it. I was probably training for like 6 months, and then I had my first amateur fight on a week's notice. My coach called me and was like, hey, we have someone pull out, do you want to like fight next week? I was like, yeah, bet. So I like just jumped in there and, had my first fight, managed to get the win. And then I remember just thinking like right after they read the decision and when I won the fight, I just kind of said to myself, I was like, this is what I want to do. Like 100%, this is what I want to do.
Yeah. You fight at 145. What are you walking at? Are you cutting a lot?
I probably walk around at like, I sort of sit around 162, 163.
My question revolves around the conditioning side, because your style, man, if a lesser opponent, I'm sure if I dig deep enough in your archives, you're breaking people with that. You could weaponize that cardio, you could weaponize that style of yours. strength and conditioning, one of the things I do is I'm an S&C coach, and in the last
Yeah.
just 5 years alone, strength and conditioning as a science in relation to MMA is just evolving at a really high level. You have your traditionalists, whether they're coaches or athletes, and you have the other side, like Dr. Corey Peacock's a friend of mine. He's the head guy down at Sanford MMA, who's like measuring data, science, rep to rep, breath work, HRV variability, fucking, wearing straps, all that good stuff. With your style, what are you doing to kind of keep track of where the conditioning is? How do you manage to get your gas tank at a high level? And maybe with a loaded question, share with us some of that stuff without giving too much away.
Well, I think for me, having the sort of initial just good base of cardio, I've thought about this a lot. I believe growing up in South Africa, where I grew up, it's above sea level.
High elevation.
Yeah. And I feel like that, whether in some way, shape or form, I feel like that's benefit me and played a factor into me having just naturally a higher sort of ability to push through, and my gas tank being sort of just naturally quite good. I mean, I find like, not that I've taken long times off training since I've started MMA, but like I could probably, do relatively nothing for like 3 months, walk in, and I'll be able to just push through whatever session we're doing. Like, just like do it. I feel
like pick things up right where you left off, sort of thing.
Pretty much. And then obviously since I came to freestyle, like I've been here just over a year now. And then obviously I do my strength and conditioning alongside Volk and one of my other teammates, Colby Thickness. We do it at a place down here called Baymed Performance, under a guy, Chris Jaffrey. And he's like, he's one of those guys. He measures like all the data. He's got so much knowledge when it comes to everything. Everything's sort of specifically worked out.
Recovery.
I'm not just doing like, I don't know, crazy, just heavy lift movements where we're just, just trying to like, where you see some of these people, like I see it even at the top level, like where, you see these guys doing like crazy heavy squats and all these sort of things. And you're like, they're 2 weeks out from a fight. And you're like, you're not a powerlifter. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. You should be tapering down. Yeah.
It's everything's specific to the movements that I'm going to do, when I'm fighting, and everything's sort of, measured out perfectly. And obviously when I'm in camp, my program's completely different to when I'm out of camp. Obviously, when I'm out of camp, some of the movements, like, you're lifting a bit heavier weight, trying to, just build that bit of strength up. But then when you're sort of in camp, it's a lot more fast, explosive movements. Stuff like hip thrust, that maintains all the way through because it's a pretty good movement that you can kind of keep relatively heavy and, consistently through the camp. And it applies really because if you think about it, someone's on top of you, the ability to kind of just shift a decent amount of weight using your full body and from such a position where you're, I guess, compromised, you could call it. That translates well. Stuff like trap bar deadlifts, that's something that's a staple movement. And then we're doing like sprints and a few other sort of more specific explosive style things. But I mean, the other conditioning side of things is just at freestyle with some of the sessions that we do. And like Joe's a mastermind when it comes to this sport and to
Lopez.
Yep. He's my head coach. Obviously, he's an absolute mastermind when it comes to this. And when I'm in camp, like I am now, on like a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we do like our 3, I guess, most difficult sessions. And people obviously that if they're following along in the sport, they've heard about they've probably seen Alex talking about the fact that he gets more nervous for training sessions than he does for a fight because of the difficulty of these sessions, how much of a grind it is. They're just like, it pushes you to the absolute limit. And it's designed to break you and make you, make it feel like it's round 3 or whatever the fight, whatever type, the length of a fight you're fighting. It's like the last minute, you're down completely, your body's completely broken down, and you've just got to push through. The lactic's built up in your arms and legs, and you're feeling heavy. You're feeling like you just need to push through. So we simulate that quite often. Like, and I always think that, like, I've had, I think 3 or 4 fights now since I've been at freestyle. And every time I've just thought that to myself, like, I just remember thinking, like, in the fight going, man, like this, I'm not even, like, I'm completely fresh. I don't even feel like I'm having this crazy experience of having an actual fight. I feel like it's just, But I mean, I feel like that factors into obviously the conditioning, the session we're doing. Like on a Thursday, we do a lactic session where, you know, you're breaking it up between your arm, like you're doing a station where your arms are just getting destroyed. And then you're trying to do a specific fight movement after that. Then you're doing a station where your legs are just getting destroyed and you're trying to do like effective movements that you're going to do in a fight whilst the lactic's so built up. And then you're doing a full body portion of that as well. And, you know, our love, like Volko actually said this yesterday, if there's ever a piece of or a situation that sums up a love-hate relationship perfectly, it's an assault bike. And like we just always talk about it, like, because, you know, from the start of camp to the end, obviously.
How are you cycling it? Like, what are your time on and time off kind of like in general?
So we split it between two different ones that we do. So on a Thursday, we do like the work when we're doing it, you're doing like a minute on the assault bike and then a minute of doing like a fight specific movement, and then you get a break, and we do that like 3-4 times. But then sometimes we do like a more power focused portion where we're doing like 30 seconds as hard as you can go, and then like a 2-minute break, and you do that a few times. So, you know, the assault bike's just one of those things where people think that I sort of don't really, I guess, utilize it that much. They look at it and go, oh, but surely it gets better as you keep doing it. Well, you get fitter through your camp, obviously, and your fitness picks up, you start peaking a bit more. So you're naturally going to push harder because you're fitter and you can hit those levels. The only thing that changes is like the RPMs get higher, the amount of calories you burn out in that portion, they get higher. So you still just destroy yourself completely on the bike. Like it never gets easier. So like
it's brutal, man. It's one of my favorite. You mentioned the trap bar in terms of, you know, double-edged sword versus a regular barbell front-loaded deadlift. The trap's one of my favorite. I have one downstairs, and the assault bike, because one of the things looking back, you know, I played multiple sports as a younger guy. I played in college, but at 40, where like I'm very professional with like how I live my life. I don't drink, my recovery. I just got out the sauna for 30 minutes. I got a dry one here in the house. I do the float tank. It's almost like having those disciplines put into play when I was younger. I often think about that, but not in a regret sort of way. But it's with you in your career. How old were you when you started kind of locking things in professionally and you were like, you know what, I have to make this decision to live as a professional if I want to be a professional as a fighter?
I think it really, like, I went pro in 2017, I believe. But it really sort of, things flipped for me when I moved to my previous gym that I was at, Southside MMA, which is in Brisbane in Queensland. And I was training under Paul Stolya, who's a Ukrainian gentleman that's the head coach at Southside MMA. He's actually the first Ukrainian black belt in jiu-jitsu that there's been. So he's like, you know, he's a pioneer of the sport. He's very knowledgeable. He grew up in the Ukraine when it was still kind of like under Soviet sort of
before 93.
Yeah, control and stuff like that. So, you know, he's one of those people that showed athletic promise and got taken and forced into these sports. And, you know, and he's just a very knowledgeable guy when it comes to, you know, various sports, but when it comes to sort of combat sports, he's very, very, very equipped and experienced to sort of shape the pathway for fighters and people that want to pursue that. And I feel like when I started training under him in 2018, that's when things kind of flipped for me a bit. And he was obviously, I look at that period that I was training with him as kind of the foundation and period that built me up to lead to where I'm at now at freestyle, but to kind of cement everything into place for me so that now that I am here, you know, I already had this kind of laser focus
foundation
more than I had this like already sort of professional approach really drilled into my head, because, you know, being that he is Ukrainian, it's kind of like the way he operates, everything's just like got to be like perfect, and you want to have everything.
Drink water. Did he tell you not to drink water during your training?
Oh, no, not at all. That is
do you hear
one
about
of the silliest things I've ever heard.
My dad was from Czechoslovakia when it was Czechoslovakia, and like that, and the Russian boxers.
They don't
fucking no water. Like, it's fucking chaos.
Yeah. I've seen a few times. I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm gonna rehydrate myself. I'm gonna listen to my nutritionist. But all right.
Yeah, you know what? And the interesting thing about that is the defense. The reasoning would be that the body takes energy to have other systems turn on. Like you're drinking the water, swallowing water. They're looking at it that you're burning energy, and you need to save every ounce of it while you're in the fight. They're not looking at, like you just said, well, I need to rehydrate and I need to like reset some stuff. But I wanted to see how old school he was, basically.
Yeah, well, in some avenues he was like super old school, and you know, like you could see that was sort of just drilled into him.
Where did he get the black belt from? Do you know who he got it from?
Yeah, so he got his black belt from Vicente Cavalcante, who's a Brazilian gentleman who is the head coach and owner of Southside Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, who's you know, he's a very, very sort of credentialed jiu-jitsu specialist in his own right. He obviously moved here from Brazil, built up a bunch of gyms around in Queensland and around that area, sort of Brisbane, the Gold Coast, Byron Bay, you know, in that sort of region. And he's like, yeah, he's obviously a well-respected sort of jiu-jitsu pioneer in his own right. And then he awarded Pasha with his black belt, and I think in total now he's got, I think VC has, I think he might be up to like 14 or 15 black belts under him now.
That's impressive, Nate. I just watched this documentary. Do you know the name Rafael Torre? Have you heard the guy who he went around telling people he was a black belt. He was like a fraud, basically, like a whole kind of the dude who he catfished MMA, basically.
Yeah.
And it's pretty crazy times that was possible back in not that long, like 2002 or 2003.
Yeah, he weaved his way into a few people's lives, like prominent people within the sport.
Yeah, and then Eddie Bravo had to call him out, and then Bravo kind of like, you know, what is it called? You know, showed him that he was a fraud. You're doing a podcast, aren't you?
Yeah, so I've I started my own podcast with a guy called Dan Meehan, he works and does a lot of stuff for Fight News Australia. End of last year, he approached me with the idea. He was always considering doing one, and then he was talking to his team and people at Fight News Australia, and they were like thinking about someone that they could do it with. And like, I mean, I'm like really invested into the sport outside of just fighting. Like I watch all of the local events here. I'm that guy that stays up at like 2 a.m. watching like Alaskan Fighting Championship.
Oh,
like
I'll send you a message.
Yeah, I just follow the sport.
You watch boxing too, don't you?
100%, yeah. So so he approached me with the idea, and then like earlier this year we sort of started the podcast Fight Talk Down Under. So we do that. We do like a weekly episode of that. I think, you know, we're 18 episodes in now, so it's still early days. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's fun too. It's kind of nice balancing trying to figure out, you know, that new sort of world, and trying to, you know, learn everything that goes into that, you know, and just take it day by day and sort of apply it moving forward. And I feel like it benefits me in my own sort of fight career as well, because I'm you know, like I said, I'm watching fights all the time. I'm analyzing these fights. I'm picking out these little things, and, you know, it's going to benefit you in my own sort of fight career moving forward, because I'm picking out these little things. I'm analyzing so much of the sport and so many fights. You know, that stuff's just going to stick. There's things that are going to be able to just translate quite well. And for me, I was kind of, because I've got a degree in communication, so I kind of made sure before I pursued MMA and went pro and started pursuing it full time, you know, being South African, my parents just drilled into me that they wanted me to have a few things to fall back on, so that I can just jump into what I want to pursue and what I'm passionate about, and know that I have those other things to fall back on. Even if I don't ever use them, I have them to fall back on. So that was kind of another no-brainer for me to sort of do the podcast. And, you know, it gives me the opportunity to kind of step away from the sport as a competitor and step into it as a fan and someone who just loves fighting and appreciates, you know, what people are doing when they're in there.
I think that's a huge benefit for overall perspective as a student of life. It's giving you running a podcast. It gives you a different perspective, even just the component of listening, holding a conversation. So many of us have lost the art of communicating, of being able to listen and not just listen to get this regurgitated statement out. You know, a lot of people you're talking to and they have this sort of narrative they talk to everyone with. It's like they're not even listening to you. They're just pausing until they speak, and it's just kind of regurgitated. But when you podcast, you're put in a position to think, have a perspective on what you're talking about, researching, like you said. I think, in 2015, I started one in Sydney called the Vision Board with a co-host. This was 7 years ago. And I started Ungoogleable in 2018. But where it's taken me, man, there's a neighborhood in Sydney called Green Acre. Not the best. 2015, I'm in Robert Whitaker's one bedroom little apartment with his fiance. He's like 20 at the time, or 21. And Jack, his little kid, was just born. He was probably like 4 months old. And I was in his kitchen podcasting with him for my first podcast. And I always tell that story because I watched that kid go from this little small one bedroom spot in a rough neck of the woods to becoming a world champion. And I wouldn't have been able to actually have a first hand seat to that if it wasn't for the podcast. And
exactly.
It was pretty cool.
You gotta take these opportunities when they're sort of presented to you, because then, more often than not, they're going to lead to some pretty cool things for you. So and the podcast as well is another opportunity for me to give people an authentic sort of view on things. So far, like I said, we're like 18 episodes in, but there's, already been so much content and time talking about fights in that period where, that I've given my breakdowns on things, and I've given my honest opinion on things. And there's been, I've been right about a few things. I've hit the nail on the head, but then there's other times where I've made these sort of breakdowns and predictions and calls, and I was completely wrong.
Of course.
But it puts me in a cool position because I can just give my authentic, honest answer about something, break it down. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And then I can just, the next week I can go, hey, look at that. I was proved wrong, whatever. And I can sort of swallow it and, just continue to maintain that. Like I actually, Carlos Ulberg was actually here not too long ago when some of the boys from City Kickboxing were at freestyle.
That dude bodied up, mate.
And man, he looks like he's carved out of stone.
Oh my God.
He's a big dude. Yeah. And I'd like spoken about his fight, and I gave my honest sort of opinion. I was just like, obviously I think the guy's there. I said something along the lines of, I think the guy is only where he's at with such minimal fights on his record because he trains at City Kickboxing. He's a good-looking dude. He's very marketable. Yeah. I think it's more that side of things that got him to where he is instead of his fighting ability.
Hey, he didn't work his way up.
And and when he was here, obviously, there was like this elephant in the room. And then I remember I sat down with the dude after a training session, and I was just like, I had a great chat with him about, what his sort of approach is, what he wants to achieve in the sport and stuff like that. And I started to tell him, I was like, man, I had you completely wrong in the way I had like thought about you in my head. I was like, man, I got to like just tell you that. And I, ended up just having this great chat to him, but that still gave me the opportunity to take what I said in an honest and sort of realistic approach. And then, actually then talk to the person and go, you know what, you proved me wrong. You've convinced me that my sort of initial thought process or the way I saw this panning out was completely wrong. And that's kind of cool. So, and that opportunity is only possible because I took that opportunity to start a podcast and put my honest thoughts and opinions out there. And it's going to lead to stuff like that, all the time.
Yeah. A couple more questions. I know it's late. I wanted to talk about specifically, you kind of touched base on it with Allberg coming from City, him getting the opportunity to fight in the UFC. But Dana does this a lot in the UFC. You see champions in weight classes, headlining events, and then a lot of times they'll try to inject fighters from their gym into different divisions to kind of give pub to the gym. You've seen it. For instance, my roommate in 2015, she fought in the UFC. She was a strawweight, and she was from a little gym here in St. Leonard's, and they had 3 fighters fighting in the UFC at one time. Richie Walsh, her name was Alex Chambers. She was a little strawweight. And with that in mind, let's say in the perfect world, Alex headlines a card, a huge pay-per-view event down in Australia. And what would the time like? And if you had a short notice fight or an opportunity to jump on a card, what you said, you walk at 62, you fight at 45. How do you is it your decision if Dana was like, hey, we got a short replacement, 145, or the fight's in 2 weeks? Like, knowing that if you take this short notice fight and you this might be your only shot versus you're not prepared for it and you might put your body and health at risk long term, how do you make that decision?
I think for an opportunity like that, it'd be sort of almost like a no-brainer to jump at that opportunity and get on there and, just kind of rely on the fact that I'm always training, I'm always in shape. I hear, don't get me wrong, having an opportunity to know who you're fighting, doing a camp for it, having that sort of great approach with it and breaking it down, the build up to the fight, working the specific things that you can exploit in the fight for, a 6-8 week period or whatever it might be with your team and your coaches. That's obviously optimal and great. But at the same time, at the end of the day, especially now, like, you're always going to continue to build and grow and develop as an athlete. At least that's sort of how I want to keep approaching it. And even with Alex now, he's the best in the world. He's the champion, but he's still continuously obsessed with improving.
His last fight, mate, he looked like a different fighter. Like, people say that. His style, even his movements, man, he looked different in a good way. Like, I don't look like a grappler anymore.
That's the outcome. That's that's how I want to keep approaching it. And I feel like I said this the other day to a friend of mine. I feel like me right now would fight the Justin that first came to freestyle and had that first fight under freestyle, a year ago, and I would destroy myself in a minute. Like, I feel like I'm leaps and bounds better than what I was. So, I feel like that's going to continue. At this level, if you're obsessed with doing that. But at the same time, if you get an opportunity to fight in the UFC on 2 weeks' notice, at the end of the day, I've had nearly 30 MMA fights. Like, I know I can fight. So if the opportunity came for me to do that, even on such short notice, and I've done that before, like, I fought at welterweight twice on 24 hours notice.
Okay.
So
you could do it. It can be done. You've done it before.
Yeah, I think at that point it's more of it's not so much a skill and, I guess, experiencing. It's a mental thing because it's a big risk but big reward type opportunity. And in that sense, I'm blessed that I've taken those gambles before. I know what can happen if it works, if it pays off. I know what it's like if it doesn't, because I've had it happen both ways. So I feel like, I wouldn't sort of even, I guess, second guess it too much. I would just kind of be like, okay, well, let's go out there and do what we think we're capable of and showcase it to, the world.
With this upcoming fight in July, Muhammad, he's I think he's 7-0. I think he's 35. Is that talk about where that fight is, your preparation, how everything's going, and does your opponent, when you know your opponent, does it really affect your game plan, or are you the type of fighter to game plan on your strengths and let the chips fall as they may, or when you have an opponent like Muhammad, you see what they do and you game plan around the opponent?
You obviously always want to try and make the approach focused on what your strengths are, your routes to victory, your abilities, and how that translates back. But at the same time, you obviously have to, like, look at your opponent and specifically prepare for what they're going to be able to do. And so with Muhammad, it is that same sort of thing. Like, I'm obviously respectful and aware of his abilities and skills, but in no way, shape, or form am I afraid or fearful of what he presents to me as an opponent. It's like, and that's kind of how you just have to be. I know that he's explosive, he's dangerous, he likes to press the action, he likes to throw everything full clip. He's trying to put people away when he's in there. And so then with Joe and Alex, we're emulating our sort of game plan and formulating something that we think is going to give us the best route to success. But at the same time, I'm just focused on knowing that, when it comes to how I approach these fights, I just have to remember the fact that I am a talented mixed martial artist. I am a complete mixed martial artist. And I think people got glimpses of the fact that, in the last fight, you can't, like, you can't just look at me and go, oh, okay, just because of my wrestling credentials and my grappling ability and think that that's all you have to worry about. Because I guarantee you, if you come into a fight with me and that's all you're focused on, that's at a detriment to yourself, and you're gonna be sitting back after the fight going, what happened. So I'm at the same time, I am like, working on a specific sort of approach for Muhammad, but I also know that, my abilities and my strengths are going to always be the thing that I need to keep working on, improving on, and relying on, when I'm in these fights. And, for me, it's cool. I kind of thrive on stuff like this. I said it after my last fight. They did like a backstage interview with me after my last fight, which I think was available. They'd had it on the ESPN broadcast when they played back the fights. And I said, like, for me, I kind of have a chip on my shoulder when I come into these fights because people, like I said, I think that they look at me and they kind of overlook me a little bit. And that's kind of cool. Like, I like being the underdog. I like having that chip on my shoulder. And then because it makes it that much sweeter when I go out there and perform. Like my last fight, Alan hadn't fought in like 3 years and, was coming off a couple of losses, but was the favorite coming into the fight. And I felt like a bit disrespected by that. Like, I fought, he was like the third dude that I fought after a long layoff, that had a long layoff, that thought they could come back to the sport and take a fight with me like it was some sort of gimme feeder fight for them to just kind of come back into the sport with. And, like, I finished 2 of those guys, and the other guy, I beat shit out of him for 15 minutes in front of his hometown crowd. So, like, I'm kind of relishing on the fact that for this fight, it's going to be the same thing. Like, don't get me wrong, Muhammad's a talented mixed martial artist. He's a dangerous guy. He is 7-0, but, on his record, that he's fought, like, 2 of the guys he's fought are, like, I guess decent opponents and people that he beat, and I look at and I go, okay, cool. I got to give him the respect for those wins. But I feel like he's built up to be this boogeyman and like this person that no one wanted to fight. And that's why I kind of put that video on my social media recently where I was like,
I like the call out, mate.
people are like,
you did it like a gentleman too.
So, and that's it, man. I've proven that I'll fight anyone at any time, any notice, any weight. It doesn't matter to me. But like I said, I respect the guy, but I'm relishing on the fact that I'm coming into this fight going to be listed as the underdog when it comes to the betting odds and all that sort of stuff. But I thrive on that, and I just look forward to showcasing the levels that I've improved since my last fight, even though it was just recently. Like, I just recently fought. It's a quick turnaround, but I feel like I've improved tremendously since then again.
Can't wait to see it, man. That fight, guys listening to this or watching this, it's going to be on UFC Fight Pass. I feel that's the best way to watch the fights. The production is awesome. Where could the people find your podcast? Is it on iTunes, Spotify? I'll put the link in the show notes.
The podcast is available. It's on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, and then obviously on YouTube. The video sort of version of it is available on YouTube. We put that out there weekly. So I think how it's sort of set up at the moment. We sort of record it on a Tuesday and put it out on the Wednesday and try and sort of just keep that, I guess, the consistency for it. But, there's hiccups here and there. Myself and Dan are both dads as well. So every now and then, the dad life gets sort of in the way a little bit. But, that's another thing that you just kind of deal with.
Yeah, man. Like I said, I'll put I'll put your links in the show notes, how people could follow you. Regarding pulling up a photo, do you want me to just find one on the web, or do you have any specific? I could probably pull one from your last fight. I like the one when you're in the octagon growling at the dude.
Okay, yeah, there's a few there. I could probably send you a couple. I feel like there's whatever you sort of.
All right,
I guess
cool.
if there's one that sticks out that you think you want to utilize, I can probably.
All right, man. Excellent. And is it the 16th? When do you?
Yeah, July 16th.
July 16th. And does Eternal always do their cards in the same location?
So their main location is the Gold Coast and Perth. The Gold Coast and Perth are their sort of 2 main locations. And then they do occasionally do shows. Well, pre-pandemic, they were doing shows in New Zealand as well.
Yep.
And Melbourne. Melbourne's sort of another one. But so I guess, but predominantly it's like the Gold Coast and Perth.
When's Alex's fight?
July 2nd.
Okay. Will he be able to is he cornering you for yours?
Yeah, he'll be back. So Joe and Alex will be back because the Friday night Joe's running his promotion again here in Wollongong Wars. Takes place July 15th. So he's going to be, so obviously that'll be when I'm weighing in for Eternal and doing all that sort of stuff. So they'll pretty much be in Wollongong the Friday night at Wars, cornering people, dealing with all that, running the promotion. Alex and him will fly up early Saturday morning at some point, or on the day of the fight, so they could be there to corner me.
Do you have anyone tracking you, like with your weight cut or anything like that? Anybody following you for this one?
So I work with my nutritionist Jack Doherty. He's based in Melbourne. So he obviously, he pretty much,
because that's good content. I'm thinking for your podcast and for your because the fans, people like myself, that fight week is interesting because you guys have to do media, you have to do prep work, you have to get your weight cut. It's like, I remember they did the Chris Cyborg fight week, and you just saw the suffering, and it was when I first started cheering for her, because before I saw that insider look, I just thought she was just this brute savage, which she is, but she's way more than that. And that behind the scenes look kind of gave the fans that, and that's what I was thinking, man. You should somebody should get a camera, a Sony A7, and document that journey for you.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm in the process at the moment with kind of getting the ball rolling with some of the stuff on YouTube, just to sort of do these sort of insider looks throughout training camp and fight week, and even just some other, sort of things that I'm into and avenues that I'm sort of pursuing. So that's definitely something that I'm sort of looking at. I mean, even with the podcast, like we're already sort of starting to look at a few bits and pieces that we can add, upgrade, change, and that's like I said, I'm really enjoying that side of things as well, where I'm actually, it's another challenge for me to sort of
creating
look at and go, okay, what can I add? What can I make different? What's working, what's not working, and just sort of approach it the same way I approach, my training and fighting. There's always something to work on. There's always something to take out that's good, that's bad, and then just kind of keep pursuing it.
That's why you are where you are, brother. I can't wait to see you fight again.